So I've been asked to complete my presentation of my paper over video. I decided to write my paper on the sport of basketball and kind of its history in the small towns of southern Alberta, particularly Raymond, Cardston, and McGrath. My main argument in the paper focused in on how um, through religion, culture, and the the culture that exists in the community, and environmental factors, how the game um, outlasted hockey, and also how um, it transitions from a man's game to the high school game that we see today. Um, I I did so by looking back at a lot of records that were created by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormon Church. They were responsible for settling most of these small towns, particularly Cardston, and then kind of flowed over into McGrath and Raymond. They first came across the area when they were working for the Canadian Pacific Railway, and then were asked by the leaders of the church to migrate north to help colonize the area, as well as to help work on the irrigation district. Basketball has long been an important sport to the members of the church. As early as 1908, it is recorded that there were games being played in Utah, and around that same time, there were games being recorded and being played here in southern Alberta. Believe the first one in Alberta was recorded to be played around 1904 in Sterling, actually. And so basketball has had a long-standing place in the Mormon Church. There's a lot of reasons that I think that that it has been able to do so. One of those is if you've ever been in a Mormon church, there's always a basketball gym. Some of them may be carpet now, and some are full-sized hardwood floors. But just as there's a chapel for the people to meet in, there's a gym for the members to participate in the weekday events, to be able to go and shoot, and to be able to play the sport of basketball. It's something that's always been there, and I feel like that has made it very easy and a very accessible sport for the kids growing up in these small towns. And so religion definitely played a key aspect in that. I also looked into how the game developed from a man's game into what we see in the high school game. If any of you had the opportunity to walk by the gym probably in the last couple of weeks as the zone tournament was being played at the university, you can see that the high school game is very strong, probably even more well attended than our university games. And so it was interesting to me to do a little bit of research on how it became so popular. Through an interview that I did with a man named Bob Gibb, who is a teacher and a principal in Raymond, grew up his whole life there playing basketball and coaching basketball. He told me a lot about the senior basketball league that used to take place, and how that was seen to be as more well attended and more competitive than the high school game. Particularly a team called the Union Jacks out of Raymond. They were inducted into the Alberta Hall of Fame in 1976, and were contributed with, I believe, 15 provincial championships over the years. He told me a lot about how at the time they didn't have these big fancy gyms to play in, and so they would play in gyms in an opera house in Raymond, and the gym in McGrath was so small that when you passed the ball and your back would be touching the wall, and so it was almost next to impossible for fans to come and watch, but they would try to pack in as much as they can. And over the years, he said, particularly in the 40s and 50s, the rivalry became so intense that there was a big falling out, a bit of a strife between the towns, and so the league kind of folded slowly. Teams from McGrath and Cardston stopped playing, and then slowly the Union Jacks didn't have anyone else to play against, and so they kind of stopped playing as well. During that same time, high schools began to build bigger gyms. He talked about the gym at LCI being a gym built in around the 50s that's still there today, being just a spectacle for them to be able to go into play in. And because of the increased ability for capacity, the game became easier accessible for fans, for family to come and watch, for students to come watch their classmates. And so the game kind of grew through the ranks in the high school game, and it slowly caught traction and continued to grow and to grow. And now we see what it is today. But it was really interesting to be able to see how the game changed from men to boys, and how it's continued to stay that way. I think one of the main reasons that it's been able to do so is because of the tradition. I was able to look up a few different interviews and different articles written about the tradition of basketball in the area, and it's true. In one of the interviews, a man named J.J. Salmon spoke about how in these small towns they didn't grow up watching the NHL stars or the NBA stars, but they grew up watching the Raymond Comets and the Carson Cougars and the McGrath Zeniths, and those were their idols, and that they just so badly wanted to be like them when they grew up. Then when they finally did get to high school, that they didn't want to, the fear of letting the tradition down is what drove them through high school. And it's a real thing, going to school in McGrath and being one of the few people that didn't play basketball. It's a tradition that runs deep, where grandparents have been Zeniths, parents have been Zeniths, kids have been Zeniths, and kids in elementary want to be at Zenith. And so with that tradition, it has continued to grow and grow, and the rivalries have just consistently stayed there. And obviously being competitive and playing at the highest level has helped encourage kids to continue to practice and to grow and to become what the programs are today. The last factor that I focused on that has allowed basketball to be an integral part of Southern Alberta is environmental factors. Most of Canada and kids growing up throughout the winters would play pond hockey almost religiously all year round, because their lakes and their ponds and their rivers were frozen over. For those of us that live in Lethbridge, we're very accustomed to the strong winds and the Chinooks, and because of that, it would melt the snow and the ice on a regular basis, so it was kind of tough to consistently be playing hockey before the indoor rink was invented or brought to these small towns. And so basketball was an easy sport for them to access, whether it was nice enough to go outside, or when it would get cold, they could go into the gym at the church. But it was a sport that they could always play, that it wasn't weather dependent, and they weren't hooped if it got too warm and melted the ice, and they weren't allowed to play hockey. And so basketball kind of grew in with that Mormon culture of loving basketball, kind of feeding the fire. Basketball caught on to be the more popular sport, and still is today, even though other sports have become easier to play, such as baseball and hockey and even golf at times. But basketball still remains to be the most popular, and I don't see that changing anytime soon, because of the reasons that I've stated, mostly to do with the fact that everyone wants to grow up to be a Zenith, a Comet, or a Cougar in these towns, and that it is something that they dream of. And when they get that opportunity, they don't want to let the other generations down, and so they continue to grow and strive to be the best they can be, even though they're in schools as small as 200 students competing against teams from Edmonton and Calgary with 2,000 students. They continue to impress and to strive to be the best that they can be. And so that's my paper. I wish I was there so I can maybe answer some questions, but maybe I'll get a couple texts or something from Dalton after, and I can pass on the answers after. Good luck to everyone else who presents, and good to see you guys.